The rain in Seattle doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker, harder to hold onto, like trying to grip a handful of wet clay. I stood on my front porch, the water dripping from the brim of my felt hat in a steady, rhythmic tap against my shoulder. I was shivering, not just from the damp chill of November, but from a deeper, internal cold. My coat, a heavy wool trench I had bought 30 years ago, felt too big for my shrinking frame. I am 78 years old. I am a retired structural engineer. I spent 40 years calculating the load-bearing capacity of steel beams, ensuring that skyscrapers didn't sway too much in the wind and bridges didn't buckle under the weight of traffic. I understood stress. I understood fracture points. Yet here I was, defeated by a simple deadbolt. I patted my pockets again, a frantic, futile gesture I had repeated 5 times in the last 10 minutes. Left pocket, lint. Right pocket, a handkerchief. Breast pocket, reading glasses. No keys. Lost. Again, for the 3rd time this month. I leaned my forehead against the cold wood of the door. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my neck. My daughter, Caroline, had told me this would happen. Her voice echoed in my head, dripping with that cloying, poisonous sympathy she had perfected over the last year. "It's the beginning, Dad," she'd said last week, patting my hand with fingers that felt more like claws. First the keys, then the stove, then, who knows, wandering, forgetting who I am? The Pines, a warehouse for the dying, a place where they medicated you into silence, parked you in front of a television, and drained your bank account until you were polite enough to stop breathing. I had refused. I had argued. I had told her my mind was as sharp as ever. But standing here, locked out of the house I built with my own hands, staring at the brass lock that refused to yield, I felt the cold seed of doubt taking root in my gut. Maybe she was right. Maybe my mind was finally eroding like a cliff face in a storm, crumbling into the sea of dementia. I pulled out my phone. My fingers trembled as I dialed the number for a locksmith. A young man named Sam arrived 20 minutes later in a battered van that smelled of oil and metal shavings. He was efficient, respectful, the kind of young man who probably called his mother on Sundays. He knelt by the door, his tools clicking against the metal lock housing.
I watched him, feeling the humiliation burn in my cheeks. "I usually keep a spare," I muttered, more to myself than him. I hid one in the planter box, but I must have moved it. "It happens, sir," Sam said, not looking up. He worked the pick with a delicate touch. Then he paused. He frowned. He reached down and lifted the heavy coconut fiber doormat. Sam asked, "You didn't need to haul me?" I froze. The rain seemed to stop. "Sam," I whispered. "Right here," Sam said. He stood up, holding a small, shiny brass key between his thumb and forefinger. It glinted in the gray light. I stared at it. "I don't use hide-a-keys, son," I said, my voice steadying. "They're a security risk." Sam looked at the key, then at me. "Well, someone put one here," he said. He inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, with a satisfying click. The door swung open, revealing the warm, dry hallway of my home. I didn't move. I stared at that key as if it were a radioactive isotope. It wasn't weathered. It wasn't tarnished. It didn't have the patina of a key that had sat under a doormat for years. It was brand new. The brass was bright. The edges sharp. I didn't put it there. I knew that with the same certainty I knew the value of pi or the tensile strength of titanium. I am meticulous. I am a creature of habit. I document everything. I do not hide keys under mats. And then, the realization hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. The missing reading glasses last Tuesday. The wallet that moved from the dresser to the kitchen counter on Thursday. The stove left on low last Sunday. A mistake Caroline had discovered when she came over to visit. I hadn't been losing my mind. I hadn't been forgetting. Someone had been coming in. Someone had a key. Someone had been staging my decline. I stood in my foyer, dripping wet, holding a key that unlocked the terrifying truth. I wasn't going senile. I was being framed. I realized then that the monsters aren't under the bed. They have a copy of your house key and call you Dad on Sundays. If you've ever had your reality twisted by the people you trusted most, if you've ever been gaslit into believing you were broken just so someone else could pick up the pieces of your estate, hit that subscribe button. Because I wasn't going to the Pines. I was going to war. Sam asked, looking concerned. I looked at him. The confusion was gone from my eyes, replaced by a cold, hard fire. I need you to do something for me, Sam.
I want you to change every lock in this house, right now. Front door, back door, garage. Sure thing, Sam said, reaching for his tool bag. And Sam, I added, reaching into my wallet and pulling out a stack of cash. I paid him triple his rate. Don't give me the new keys yet. Cameras, I said. Pinhole cameras. In the hallway, the kitchen, and the study. Sam looked at the money, then at my face. He saw the betrayal etched into my wrinkles. He saw the resolve. He nodded slowly. I can do that, he said quietly. Family, I said. The word tasted like ash. For 3 days, I lived in the dark. I didn't tell Caroline I had changed the locks. I didn't mention the key under the mat. I played the part she had written for me. When she came over on Tuesday to bring me groceries, 3 frozen lasagnas and a bag of wilted salad, I feigned confusion. I let my hand shake when I poured the tea. I called her Martha twice, my late wife's name. I saw the gleam of triumph in her eyes, quickly masked by a performance of concern that would have won her an Oscar. "Oh, Dad," she sighed, glancing at her husband, Greg, who was leaning against the counter checking his phone. "You're getting worse. Mom has been gone for 10 years. I know, I muttered, rubbing my forehead. I get confused. Greg smirked. He was a small man with big ambitions and a gambling habit he thought I didn't know about. "It's scary, Arthur," he said, leaving the stove on, forgetting names. "We really need to sign those power of attorney papers for your own safety." "Maybe you're right," I whispered, staring at the floor, making myself look small. "It's okay, Dad," Caroline said, patting my shoulder. "We'll take care of everything." They left an hour later. As soon as the door closed, I stood up. I walked to the window and watched them drive away. I wasn't lost. I was found. That night, I sat in my study, the blackout curtains drawn tight. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated my face. I was watching the feed from the new cameras. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Front door. I watched the screen. The handle jiggled. Then, a key slid into the lock. It didn't turn. The new deadbolt held firm. I heard muffled cursing through the audio feed. "Damn it," Greg's voice whispered. "He can't even remember to put on pants," Caroline hissed back. "He probably just jammed it." They moved around the house. I switched camera views.
The back door handle rattled. They had a key for that one too. I watched as the door swung open. I had intentionally told Sam not to rekey the garden entrance. It was the bait. They crept into my kitchen like cockroaches. Caroline was wearing dark clothes. Greg was wearing gloves. They didn't go for the TV. They didn't look for cash. They went straight to my medicine cabinet. I watched in high-definition horror as Greg opened the bottle of my heart medication, Lisinopril. He dumped the pills into his hand and replaced them with white tablets from a plastic baggie in his pocket. "Sugar pills," he whispered. Caroline asked, her voice tight. "Positive. His blood pressure will spike within 48 hours. He'll get dizzy, maybe have a minor stroke. It'll prove he's medically incompetent." My blood ran cold. They weren't just gaslighting me. They were trying to induce a medical event. They were manufacturing my incompetence at the risk of my life. Then Caroline went to the fridge. She took my reading glasses from the counter where I had left them. She opened the vegetable crisper and hid them behind a head of lettuce. "He'll find them in the morning," she whispered. They moved to the study. Greg opened my filing cabinet. He knew exactly where to look. He pulled out a thick manila folder. "Found it," he whispered, holding it up like a trophy. "The deed to the lake property. It's unencumbered." Caroline asked. "Equity line? At least 300,000, Greg said, his eyes greedy. "We can borrow against this as soon as he signs the capacity waiver." Caroline asked. "Mister, Finch is broke," Greg scoffed, "and the old man is a vegetable carry. Look at him. He's shaking. He's confused. He'll sign anything if you tell him it's a permission slip for a field trip." They laughed, a quiet, conspiratorial chuckle in the dark of my own home. They left an hour later, locking the back door behind them. I sat in the silence, the hum of the computer fan the only sound in the room. I wasn't sad. I was past sadness. I was an engineer,
and I had just identified a critical structural failure in the foundation of my family. I picked up the phone. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Marcus," I said when he answered. It was 3 a.m., but Marcus never slept. He was an old war buddy who now ran a private investigation firm that specialized in corporate fraud. Marcus grunted. "No," I said, my voice steady and cold.
I need you to run a full financial audit on my son-in-law. Gambling debts, loans, everything. And bring your lawyer," Marcus asked. "Sunday," I said. The silence of a house just before a storm is different from the silence of peace. It's a held breath, a tension coiled in the drywall, waiting for the first crack of thunder to release it. Sunday arrived wrapped in a shroud of gray mist, the sky the color of a fresh bruise. I had spent the morning preparing the stage. I dusted the mantel where my wife's photo sat, her eyes watching me with a stillness I envied. I polished the silver, the heavy, ornate pieces Caroline had been eyeing since she was 16, until they gleamed like weapons. I set the table for 4. Myself, Caroline, Greg, and the witness they didn't know was coming. I had called Caroline at 9 a.m. I told her I was ready. I told her I had a moment of clarity in the night, a lucid interval where the fog rifted, and I realized she was right. I couldn't live alone. The house was too much. The stairs were too steep. I told her to bring the papers. "Oh, Dad," she had sighed, the relief audible even through the phone line. "I'm so glad. We just want you to be safe." The hunger at this table wasn't for meat and potatoes. Greg sat at the head of the table, my seat. He spread his arms, claiming the space, his suit jacket straining against his shoulders. He was sweating, a sheen of moisture on his upper lip, despite the cool temperature of the house. "So, Arthur," Greg said, not wasting time with pleasantries. He pulled a thick manila folder from his briefcase and slid it across the polished mahogany. "We have everything set up. The Pines has a bed opening tomorrow. Room 204. It overlooks the garden." "Peaceful," I repeated, staring at the folder. "We just need to sign over the asset management to Caroline," Greg continued.
uncapping a pen with a sharp click, so we can handle the transition. I opened the folder. My hand trembled, a calculated affectation. Durable power of attorney, medical proxy, a quitclaim deed for the house, a separate deed for the lake property. It was a comprehensive dismantling of my life, a death warrant signed in triplicate. Mr. Finch, the notary, shifted in his chair. He looked at the floor, at the walls, anywhere but at me. He knew. He smelled the coercion, but his fee was likely substantial enough to plug his nose. "Of course," I said, closing the folder. "I understand." Caroline let out a breath she had been holding. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It is, Dad. You'll see. You'll be so much happier not having to worry about." "But first," I said, pulling my hand away. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out a small black velvet box. Caroline's eyes widened. A avaricious light kindled in them. She thought it was jewelry. She thought it was her mother's diamond engagement ring, the one piece I had refused to give her when Martha passed. "Open it," I said, sliding the box toward her. She picked it up. Her fingers fumbled with the latch. She popped the lid. Inside, resting on the black satin cushion, was not a diamond. It was a key. A small, shiny brass key. The one Sam, the locksmith, had found under the doormat 5 days ago. Caroline froze. Her smile faltered, twitching at the corners like a glitching video feed. She stared at the key, then at me, confusion warring with recognition. She asked, her voice tight. "It's a spare," I said. I dropped the raspy, weak voice. I sat up straighter, my shoulders squared. The tremor in my hands vanished.
When I spoke again, it was with the deep, resonant baritone of the man who had shouted orders over the roar of pile drivers and excavators for 40 years. "I found it under the doormat on Tuesday," I said, locking eyes with her. "Strange place for a key, don't you think? Especially since I never put one there." Greg shifted in his seat, the sweat on his lip beaded heavier. "Arthur, what is this? You're confused again," I asked. I picked up the remote control that had been sitting next to my water glass. "Mr. Finch," I said, addressing the notary without looking at him, "you might want to watch this. It concerns the legality of the document you're about to notarize." Finch went pale. He stopped, reaching for his stamp. I pressed play. The large 80-inch television mounted on the wall, Greg's Christmas gift to me 2 years ago, bought with my money, flickered to life. The footage was grainy but clear. It was black and white night vision. The timestamp in the corner read Tuesday, 2:14 a.m. On the screen, the back door of my house opened. Caroline and Greg walked into my kitchen. They moved with the furtive, practiced silence of thieves. Greg went to the medicine cabinet. Caroline went to the fridge. The audio, captured by the high-sensitivity microphone Sam had installed, was crisp. "He's a vegetable, Carrie." Greg's voice boomed from the speakers, filled with contempt. "He'll sign anything if you tell him it's a permission slip for a field trip." The silence in the dining room was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a crypt. On the screen, Caroline laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. "Just make sure you swap the pills." Caroline's face drained of color, leaving her looking waxen and old, a caricature of the daughter I thought I knew. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Greg stood up so fast his chair screeched against the hardwood floor, toppling over with a crash. "You can't record us. That's entrapment." "It's my house," I said. I stood up. I didn't use the cane. I didn't use the table for support. I stood straight, 6 feet of anger and iron looming over the table. And in this state, it is perfectly legal to record security footage on your own property. It's called the Castle Doctrine of Privacy, Greg. I turned my gaze to Mr. Finch. The little man was trembling, clutching his briefcase to his chest like a life preserver.
You just witnessed a video confession of conspiracy to commit fraud, grand larceny, and elder abuse. I suggest you leave before the police arrived. They are on their way. And Mr. Finch? Finch didn't wait. He grabbed his bag and bolted. I heard the front door slam seconds later. "Dad, please," Caroline whispered. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. We were desperate. Greg owes money to bad people, loan sharks. They threatened us." I walked over to the sideboard. I picked up the orange prescription bottle Greg had tampered with. I shook it. The pills rattled. Sugar pills, placebos meant to let my blood pressure spike until I stroked out. You? I asked, tossing the bottle onto the table. It slid across the wood and hit her plate. You replaced my heart medication with sugar? That isn't desperation. That isn't borrowing. She shrieked, turning on Greg, her survival instinct kicking in. You said you were just moving them. Greg roared. He looked at me, his eyes wild, cornered. He wasn't looking at me like a father-in-law. He was looking at me like a witness. Give me the tape, old man. He took a step toward me, his hands balled into fists. The kitchen door swung open. Marcus stepped out. He was 75, the same age as me, but he was built like a fire hydrant. He was an ex-Marine who had seen combat in places Greg couldn't find on a map. He held a heavy hickory walking stick in his hand, not for walking, but as a weapon. Behind him stood 2 uniformed police officers, their hands resting on their belts. I wouldn't do that, son, Marcus said. His voice sounded like gravel grinding in a mixer. Greg wilted. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. He slumped back, hitting the edge of the table, and put his head in his hands. Caroline, I said. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red, pleading. She looked like the little girl who used to scrape her knees in the driveway, expecting me to fix it. I spent my life building a legacy for you, I said, my voice thick with grief. I built this house. I built the lake cottage. I worked 18-hour days. I saved every penny so you would never know the cold. I pointed to the key on the table. And you tried to steal the fire from my hearth while I was still sitting by it. I'm sorry, Daddy, she sobbed, reaching for my hand across the table. Please, I'll leave him. I'll fix it. I looked at her hand.
I remembered holding it when she was small. I remembered walking her down the aisle. I pulled my hand away. You can't fix a foundation that is rotten to the core, I said. I have updated my will. I signed it this morning with a different notary. The house, the lake property, the savings, it all goes to the engineering scholarship fund at the university. Her jaw dropped. I can, I said, and I did. You get nothing. Not the house, not the money. I nodded to the officers. Get them out of my house, I said. The police escorted them out. Greg went quietly, defeated. Caroline screamed and begged all the way to the cruiser, a litany of excuses that faded into the damp air. I walked to the window. I watched as they were placed in separate cars. The flashing blue lights reflected off the wet pavement, washing the street in a cold, cleansing light. They drove away. I turned back to the room. It was quiet. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Marcus walked over to the sideboard. He poured 2 glasses of scotch from my private reserve. He handed me one. To the load-bearing walls, Marcus said, raising his glass. To the ones that hold, I replied. I took a sip. It burned, but it was a good burn. It warmed the cold place in my chest where my daughter used to be. I was alone in my house. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It wasn't the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of peace. I walked to the front door. I closed it firmly. I turned to that bolt. It slid home with a solid, heavy thud. It was the sound of safety. It was the sound of a perimeter secured. It was the sound of my life, finally, securely, mine, again.